I would call the January 23rd meeting of the Citizens Advisory Committee to order. Would you join me in the flag salute? Welcome to everyone. We're happy to see you joining us for the beginning of the 2020 process. As far as the agenda is concerned, are there any requests from committee members for modifications to the agenda? Any modifications from staff perspective? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to item 3. This would be the public comments opportunity to speak on matters not agendized. So if any member of the public would like to address the committee on an item not agendized for today's discussion, please come forward. All right. We move to item D, the discussion items. First would be approval of the 12/12 meeting action summary. Any comments, corrections, or notations to those minutes?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to move approval of the action summary with the amendment that for this summary and future summaries, that those members absent or excused also be included.
Okay. We have a motion for approval with a request for a modification to the format of the agenda at future meetings. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, a motion and a second. Any discussion? Any public comment on the concept of including the status of all committee members in the future agenda items summary? Okay. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously. Item number D2, the County Administrative Office updates.
Good afternoon, committee. I'm Fiona Wilson, Administrative Services Officer, filling in for our Senior Admin Analyst, Neftali Rubio Mills. And this is our Administrative Secretary, Vanessa Erickson. She'll be taking notes during the meeting. First item is just, you'll notice there's a separate stapled packet. That's your Form 700, and those need to be completed and returned. They are due by April 1st. If you could return them at the next meeting or just prior to April 1st, that would be appreciated. That's a requirement of the FPPC. And at first quarter, that went to the board on December 10th. We had $439,012 in savings from the prior year, and in accordance with your secondary recommendations, that money went to roads. Second quarter reports are due from Measure Z recipients at the end of this month, and once we get all of those in, those will be posted to our website. Mid-year estimates. Our revenue is estimated to come in this fiscal year, 1920, at $11 million, which is $121,000 higher than budgeted. Additionally, the DHHS is anticipating $84,000 in savings. So mid-year will go to the board on February 4th, and there will be $205,528 available for additional allocations. So departments, they've been very conservative in providing their year-end estimates, so it's likely that more savings will actually be realized, but staff will continue to monitor that as the year progresses and keep you updated. For the 2021 fiscal year, applications are now being accepted. A final copy of the approved application is included in your packet, and that's due by February 17th at 5 p.m. Revenue is currently estimated to be $10.9 million, with $7.8 million in ongoing costs, leaving an estimated $3.1 million available for your committee's recommendations to the board in March. And as we're currently only halfway through the year, staff will continue to monitor those revenues and trends as the year progresses.
Any questions or comments from committee members? I do have one question. In reference to the summary documents that are labeled fiscal year 2017-18 projections, and then the 2018-19 adopted, in the line 1100, which is the sheriff's budget, does that reflect an equal number of FTEs in both of those time periods?
Which documents were you looking
I'm
at?
looking at the second to last page, which is labeled Measure Z fiscal year 2017-18 projections. It's the summary of costs by entity, and line 1100 is the one that's the sheriff's office.
So
My question
those,
is, does the 2017-18 reflect the same number of FTE positions as the 2018-19 adopted? In other words, are we talking 35 employees in both, or are we talking more employees in one than the other? What I'm trying to get to is, can we, in fact, as you know, we've shown some interest in seeing what sort of inflationary effects are taking place in the personnel costs. So if the number of FTEs is the same, and understand what the inflation is.
is this the worksheet that was in your packet?
The 2017-18 personnel allocation for the sheriff was 40, which is the current allocation that they have in 1920. Do you have the projections that I gave you?
Excuse me, Chairman, I don't know what page you're on.
Okay, if you take the second to the last piece of paper in the bundle and look on the forward page,
Fiscal year 17-18?
the one that says fiscal year 2017-2018 projections is what it's labeled.
Okay, good.
This
I didn't know.
to this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Show me.
So yes, the FTEs are the same amount of FTEs. There were 40 FTEs in 17-18, and the sheriff has 40 FTEs in the current fiscal year. Or what you're trying to surmise is how much of the allocation is going to go to the sheriff in fiscal year 2021?
No, what I was trying to do is compare the costs of hopefully an equal employee group in one fiscal year compared to this next fiscal year.
As compared to actuals?
Yes.
Okay.
That's why I was curious, because one's labeled projections, and I don't know what the actuals are in 2017-2018, whereas the 2018-19 document is labeled budgeted, but also might not be the actual expenditures, correct?
For 18-19, these are actuals that are in here, yes. But while there may be 40 allocations for the sheriff, there are vacancies that
Yeah, no,
occur.
I
So
understand that.
the sheriff might be able to speak better to what vacancy rate was in 17-18 versus 18-19.
Okay. Maybe for the committee's purposes, or maybe let me speak for myself, for my purposes, when you have a document presented that's labeled projections in one case, adopted budget in another case, and then the actual expenditures in the third case, it makes it difficult for us to compare, because projections obviously are exactly that, adopted budget is exactly that, and it may or may not actually reflect the actual expenditures. So it would be helpful from our perspective, or at least my perspective, to have a document that either reflects the actual expenditures or the budgeted or the projections, so that you could make some sort of reasonable, inference from the documents. As it is, when you're trying to compare a projected document to a budget document to an actual expenditures, it's nonsensical.
So they all contain the adopted budget, they all contain the adjusted budget, so that your committee can see the changes that occurred during the fiscal year. 17-18 refers to actuals, 18-19 refers to year-to-date. So
Okay. So
I'm
even
not,
though it's labeled projections, it's the actual expenditures?
I'm not entirely sure where you're getting projections.
Yeah, Chair Zemer, so I understand your confusion because at the very top it says projections. Now, if you go down just a couple of rows, in the left column it says adopted budget, then it says adjusted budget, and then it says year end. Year end means year end actuals, and that is across the fiscal years. So you do have the information that you're asking for.
Okay, so even though the header shows projections, you're saying the internal information in the documents reflects both the projection, the budget, and the actual expenditure?
that is
the
what I'm
total
saying.
expended. So just as using this particular example, the sheriff's actual expenditure in the 2017-18 was 4,003.7, whereas the same FTEs in 2018-19 were 4,895,000. So it went up a little over $500,000 in that intervening time period for the same category and number of employees.
That is correct. However, again, I would point out that there are vacancies that occur during the fiscal year. So this may not this may not reflect 40 versus 40.
It may
Depends on
reflect the actual number of filled positions.
the actual salary expenditures for those years.
So just to carry this discussion further on, the 2017-2018 actual amount might reflect, and I'm just picking this number as an example, might reflect an average of 6 open positions in that fiscal year, whereas the 2018-19 might reflect just theoretically only 2 open positions, and therefore you can't do a line-to-line comparison because you're not categorizing the same number of employees for the same number of actual months of employment.
That is correct. In addition to that, salary expenditures tend to go up by 5 or 6% each year.
Okay. Well, like I said, we had these discussions, and we had obviously forwarded the letter to the board, trying to kind of hone in on that sort of discussion and so on. Without a tremendous amount of staff work, is it possible to present I'll use apples for apples comparison, saying, let's take the number of FTEs as an example, and then divide that into the total cost, and then show I'll call it an occupancy factor that shows how many of those positions were actually filled, so we get a good sense of what the inflationary costs actually are?
Employee vacancy is a difficult thing to project throughout the year because it's very fluid. It's changing. As somebody leaves, somebody new comes in. Sometimes positions are vacant for a portion of the year. Sometimes positions are vacant for the entire year. So determining position vacancy would be difficult at best.
Okay, so there's not an easily adaptable way to get this apples for apples comparison that we've been trying to address, is what I'm hearing. Is that correct?
That is
Okay. Thank you.
correct.
Did you want to comment?
Yeah, I'll just comment on that. Just wanted to kind of whittle down. I was not at the last couple meetings, so I apologize for coming in late on this conversation. I just kind of wanted to know, maybe we'll discuss this later. What's the reasoning why we're trying to get that number boiled down? What's the, having staff coming and reporting on that number? What was the reason for the committee to want to dive down into that number?
Okay. Let me speak for myself, and then I'll let the committee members speak for themselves. As you recall, back in September, the committee directed me to write a letter to the Board of Supervisors advising them that we were beginning to be concerned about the increasing percentage of the overall funding that was going to the carryover positions. I wrote a letter in early September to the board indicating that we had concerns about this and would like to discuss that with them. I think it was the 17th of November, it was agendized, and I spoke briefly to the board, just conveying to them our, maybe concern's too strong a word, but at least our awareness of the fact that there was an increasing percentage of the fund being allocated to the ongoing positions. Our concern was, quite frankly, that continued, even for, say, the next 5 years, there seemed to be the capability that element of the expenditure would basically extinguish the discretionary portion of the fund. So essentially there would be no need, quite frankly, for a Measure Z committee because the ongoing positions would have absorbed the totality of the funding available. The board, as you're aware, decided ultimately to convene I think it was called a task force that consists of your office, the district attorney's office, probation, and I'm not sure public defender, but in any case, the information conveyed back to me was that that group is going to meet and they're supposed to produce some sort of a response or document or analysis by April of 2020. And the suggestion to the committee was that the Board of Supervisors did not view that situation at the current time to be in crisis characterization and so on, and that we should wait until this task force reported back to us. My particular concern is that quite frankly, I don't share that view. I think we are at a point where the committee needs to take a look at our ongoing process and ask ourselves, can we continue to just automatically, without any consideration, continue that funding? And I say that for the following reason. Our process historically has been that the staff comes to us and they tell us what portion of the projected funding is committed for the following year for the ongoing positions. And then we try to strategize and consider the allocation of the remaining amount based on the assumption, the automatic assumption, that all of those positions will just be carried forward. Speaking again for myself as an individual, that's an assumption I'm no longer willing to automatically make. It may be that with presentation of information, I think it's entirely justified, but I'm uncomfortable at this point with just the automatic assumption that all those carry forward and the rest of the applicants are left to fight over, the remainder of the fund. So we've talked in general terms that, and you just heard the staff suggest that in general, the personnel costs go up 5 to 6% per year. At the current rate, that means that segment of the population is gaining essentially $500,000 a year of obviously a limited fund, and in a very, very short time period would totally extinguish the fund. So that's where my particular interest comes. I'm not at all in any way imputing the merit of the positions or the process that was developed historically to move forward in that direction. But I am to the point where at least I would like there to be some discussion, and I want an honest and clear understanding of what the true inflationary elements of this process are, so we don't find ourselves 3 years down the road and we've got $200,000 in discretionary money and the same, $15 million in allocations to the outside agencies. There's a lot of political, elements to this whole discussion, obviously. But I think as a committee member, I feel obligated to fully understand the process, fully understand the trends that are going forward, and then make informed decisions based on all that information. And I don't come to it with, like I said, any value judgment as far as whether you should have 40 or 42 or 38 or 37. That's not my point. My point is the community, I think, expects us to be good stewards of this money, and just beginning the discussion with the assumption that we're not even going to consider 2/3 of the allocation just isn't, a good mechanism by which to meet that obligation to the public. I think the committee can be knowledgeable, and I think we can have good information, and I think we have the staff capable of providing us with good information. But for me personally, that's no longer an element that I'm just willing to ignore and assume is just an automatic, step one in the process. If other committee members would like to speak,
Okay.
because that's my view, only my view as an individual.
Okay, I appreciate you saying that, Glenn, because I think there does definitely need to be some education here as far as when this original committee was formed. There was really stringent rules that the CAO laid out. Phil Smith-Haynes laid it out to us as far as this is the results of the committee. This is the results of Measure Z, and these are the responsibilities of this committee, advisory board committee. And this was a county tax measure that was passed for essential services. And so we laid it out as far as the initial outcome or outlaying of positions that we needed to do our essential services for the county based upon what the ballot measure really outlined. And that was our first and kind of second year's worth of allocations. And to say that we would have to, as a county, have to come to this advisory board and to request the same thing every year because there's loads of people that would like to have part of this money, I don't think is the role of this committee. I don't think that is what this committee is supposed to do as far as regulating what a position and saying that as a county, a DA's office, sheriff's office, probation, if we have Measure Z money, it could be in jeopardy because of escalating costs. That's going to be up to the Board of Supervisors to determine, of how to determine that if and when the costs escalate to a point where we don't have any more to, dole out to outside agencies. But the CAO is here. Maybe she can shed more light on things and kind of lay out some expectations. I don't know.
So my apologies for not introducing myself earlier when I came up to the microphone. My name's Amy Nilsson. I'm the County Administrative Officer. And one of the things I would just like to remind this advisory body of is that your board did submit a letter, your committee did submit a letter to the Board of Supervisors. And the board did respond by asking myself and the sheriff and the district attorney and the chief probation officer to meet to look at long-term financial forecasting of Measure Z dollars. That is in progress and that is happening, and there will be a report back to the board. It is up to the Board of Supervisors on how to allocate Measure Z dollars based on recommendations that your board provides. But I would encourage this advisory body to remain in an advisory role and provide information to the board via letters, such as you had done earlier, and then the board can act on that and they can direct staff to do that research. And we're happy to do that research, and we're happy to look into the long-term financial planning of Measure Z. We are just fine-tuning the revenue estimates for Measure Z. We're looking out 10 years, and even at 10 years, the ongoing costs don't take over Measure Z, and the need for your advisory body we still need you
50%.
all.
No, wait.
Excuse me, could you clarify that comment? You said
Yeah.
in 10 years, they don't take it over. If,
That's based on our financial forecasting right at this point in time.
okay, according to your document that your staff provided to us last time, you're at, I think it's between 68 and 70% currently, correct?
Yes. Sure, yes.
Okay.
This is the
So
document you're referring to.
If the 5% per year that your staff previously said today was accurate in a 10-year period, you'd have 5% compounded for 10 years, which would be more than 50%. And since the net revenue of the fund is essentially static, how do you come to the conclusion that it wouldn't overtake the fund? Because the numbers just don't work.
So Chair Zemer, so probably what you're not considering is growth. Typically with all revenue sources, there is growth. And so we are also looking at that. And so when we have that complete information, we're happy to share that with your advisory body. But most importantly, we'll be sharing it with the Board of Supervisors for them to make a decision on how they'd like to allocate the funds.
Let me just say a couple of quick things. I understand the sheriff's position, and I have no issue with his posture. To suggest, however, that the committee is only directed, or the intent of the committee was only to deal with the surplus, if it exists, is a characterization that I would politely differ with. I think the committee is certainly an advisory committee, and I certainly understand my role as an advisor. I am not a decision maker, and I don't pretend to be. But what I do think I am is I'm a party who is charged to have a good understanding of the comprehensive activity and operations of the Measure Z fund. And to suggest somehow that we should only consider whatever is left over after the county's allocations are made, to me, is not a fair characterization, number one, of the intent of the measure, nor the charge given to us by the previous CAO. So I would respectfully disagree with the sheriff's characterization that we should just keep our mouth shut and deal with whatever's left over. I'm very uncomfortable with that accusation or that position.
So Chair Zemer, I am not at all saying that you should only be dealing with the remaining funds. I do believe this advisory body has made recommendations to the Board of Supervisors to support positions that are ongoing in the Sheriff's Department and the District Attorney's Office. So I believe that is an accurate statement to say that this advisory body has supported those ongoing positions. And so there is to suggest that the county is only interested in this advisory body only in the funds that are not allocated to county departments is not necessarily a fair characterization, but we do have an obligation through the ballot language to fund essential services, which in the ballot language is very much focused on the sheriff, the district attorney, fire, and so staying within those core services that are that's listed very clearly in the ballot language is important for your advisory body to consider.
I would agree with everything you said there. Mr. Ames?
Wait, I had a question. I want to go back to your 10-year projection. It
It's
just,
not done yet.
but
Sorry.
it just doesn't, you're adding to the projection that revenues are going to go up. I find that hard to believe in Humboldt County in 10 years. And I'm on committees that see this money coming in
Sure,
using tax money.
sure.
So I think if you're, to take back to your meetings, to say that we're going to cover our shortfalls by increased revenues, I find that hard to believe.
Mr. Ames, I'm not saying we're going to cover our shortfalls by increased revenue. I don't believe I said that. But what we do through financial forecasting is we do look at trends in sales tax, and whether that's statewide or local trends, we do look at that. We do contract with HDL, which is a sales tax audit firm, and they help us provide sales tax estimates. So we do put a lot of time into our forecasting, and the forecasting for Measure Z is not currently completed. But over time, there is growth in sales tax. There's growth in property tax, although we're not dealing with property tax in this particular situation. But over time, there is growth in sales tax, and we would anticipate to see that growth in Measure Z.
Well, we just lost Sears and Pier 1 imports, and
Sure.
I just find, I just don't like that answer. Don't worry about it because it's going to be taken care of.
Oh, I don't
I
mean,
agree with the chairman, that
yeah.
we should be concerned about it.
In fairness to the
And
staff,
I'm gonna
I
go
was
back-
skeptical myself, but I think we owe them the courtesy and the professionalism to let them finish their study. And at that point, then if we decide to be critical of it, that's fair. But at this point, it's not fair to be critical of something that doesn't exist yet.
Right, and my apologies for even bringing it up because it's not done. We're still in the midst of working on it.
Can't
And
do this to the sharp committee up here.
so my apologies for that, but we do take a lot of time in our forecasting, and overall, long-term, there should be sales tax growth. And while, yes, there are business losses, there are also business gains, and so sometimes that evens out. But we will be looking at it more closely, and we will be presenting that to the Board of Supervisors, and we can share that with you as well.
I have a question.
Thank you. I have one more point.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. My point is now to Fiona.
Okay.
When you pass these out, could you please number the pages? Because if you may have noticed here, when the chairman was referring to something, a lot of us were running or thumbing through and couldn't find where he was talking. So if you would number the pages, it would help us all a lot, I think.
I'm happy to do that for you,
I'm
Rich.
glad you're happy. Thank you.
And I'm sorry, I'm just trying to, fairly new here still and just trying to catch up from last year, but we are the third largest employer in Humboldt County, so I am very familiar with the process and the carryover I'm wondering if you guys could kind of bring me up to date to this question. Is there, what the cause is for? Is there carryover money sitting there? Are there a lot of unfunded positions? I mean, it would be easier to look back forward at the pattern than the prediction forward, I think, in asking for these reports and kind of get to the bottom of what's going on, because it may be not cause for any concern. But if there is a pattern and a history of things going on, then that might be a little bit easier to pin down and get to the bottom of your question. But again, I may not know, I may be heading in the wrong direction, but.
Yeah, I share your concern, but I also want to be respectful of the staff's comment that it is difficult, to develop a completely linear and completely equivalent document because of the relatively dynamic nature of personnel. That makes it hard to do the analysis, and it makes it hard to come to good conclusions because it's not fair to anyone to take a situation where, say, and I'm not picking on the sheriff here, I'm just using I'm just using his department as an example because it's the largest, recipient, and that's the only reason, and I want to make it clear, I don't hold any hostility to the process and so on. But developing the document you're talking about is something that's going to be a little more difficult than I thought it would ultimately because of the dynamic nature of the personnel process. And I'm sure right now he's got people, in the pipeline that are going to be filling positions at mid-year or at various points in the year. So now, even though we might have allocated 40 positions, he's only going to utilize 37.2 because of all of that dynamic.
I get that, but I was wondering if there was being money moved around or used for different things, which tends to happen in a budget sometimes when people don't fill those positions, what you're talking about. And I'm asking if that was cause for concern, or if you could help me kind of understand where
Yeah,
this is coming from.
my answer to that question is I don't believe so. I think it's fair to say that the board and the staff have been very, what's the word I want to use? Very attentive to requests to move the money around. I know there have been, help me if I'm wrong, but 4 or 5 requests maybe in the last year to reallocate money that Measure Z had, or appropriations that we had suggestion. And in each case, the staff has taken a very specific question to the Board of Supervisors. Are you, this money is going to be unexpended in this mechanism. Are you comfortable reallocating it to this alternate? So I don't think there's a lot of slide in the fund
There's a
laterally.
paper trail.
I think they do a very good job of tracking that and trying to ensure that the money is expended as it was intended. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, and I can answer some of that based upon my knowledge and my working budget. So yes, there's every year there's unspent money, and then that money is turned back over to the board to allocate because we have specific rules of what we're spending that money on. And this year, especially with our office being 19 positions down, and operation-wise, some of those are Measure Z positions, and so we will be giving at least 5 to 6 positions back as far as that money goes for the Board of Supervisors to reallocate for some of the priorities that we suggested here that they should spend it on at the
So
end of the year.
even if you are giving them that much, there's they should have a cushion and they are returning it. So there's a checks and balances too.
And I believe that is.
Did that answer your question?
is-
I was just wondering where it was coming from.
Okay. Yeah, I think in most cases, and I'm speaking from general knowledge here, not specifics, in the fire budgets and so on, they've had some timing issues with the development of facilities and so on, I know, based on land use issues and that sort of thing. So just to pick the fire agencies as an example, I know they have returned money when the land use planning process couldn't allow them to construct a building as rapidly as, so there's those types of things. And then there's the dynamic nature of the personnel issues in every agency, not just the sheriff's. Obviously, in all of the applicants have some sort of dynamic personnel posture and so on. I personally don't think that there's any concern. I don't think the public should have any concern about this money sliding around undetected and moving from category to category. I think the staff and the committee have done a good job of making sure that that in fact has not happened. And that was never, a portion of my discussion. I guess just to summarize what I wanted to say is I am uncomfortable with the automatic nature of that allocation at this point in time. I am not suggesting that it's not meritorious, and I'm not suggesting that it's not, in fact, what this committee should ultimately recommend to the Board of Supervisors. But I am uncomfortable with the automatic assumption that that's the baseline at which we begin.
I wanted to jump in. I think this really tags into the agenda item of strategic framework. And that speaks to what this committee is trying to discuss and at least have a conversation about in a way that's looking long-term rather than year to year. One of my big issues between the directly county-funded positions, the continuing positions, and the application process is the county positions don't fulfill all of the measures of that, all of the requirements of that ordinance. So we need to have a mechanism that can allow for those other items to be covered. And I also believe we need to have a mechanism that allows for public comment and public input on priorities of what public safety is and how to value that. And so my goal is to try to come from this committee as a advisory committee to say to the Board of Supervisors, here's another way to look at this that allows for all of the aspects to be addressed. I'm not trying to undercut any of the county positions. I recognize their value, I recognize the work they do, I recognize the risks they take. But I'm really just trying to have a discussion with this group where we can also value the other things like fire, like ambulance coverage, like children's mental health, like child abuse services, that happen beyond those directly funded positions that are more of a program-based.
I'll get to the public in just a second. Any more committee members?
Jonathan Flyer, previous chairman of this committee a few years ago, routinely asked for an outside audit. Is there any internal audit that's available to us or an outside audit, either one? It's like,
The audit of Measure Z is complicated and it is underway. We are currently contracted with Clifton Larson Allen, who does our single audit. And they're going through the process. They've gone out to many of the outside agencies and have evaluated their documents, and now they're evaluating our internal documents. I don't have an ETA on the finalized audit of that. They are now engaged in performing our internal or our external single audit, but they are well underway with that process.
I'd like to echo Chairman Zemer's comment that this is not accusatory. I think that something like that would help us understand the finances here and what's happening.
Other committee comments? Members of the public like to speak to this issue?
Mary Benedict from Kamau Medical Center for the Willow Creek Ambulance Service. I just wanted to note, and just because you're referencing the document that was passed out, that our wages were not included in the non-county portion. And so, in fact, the last 2 years on our application, we've requested to have recurring funds. So I just wanted to make sure the committee was aware that we weren't included on the sheet, even though we definitely have salaries and fringe associated with Measure Z funding.
That document, to my understanding, was only intended to deal with the internal positions that are actually directly funded by the county, not those applicants who might provide a similar service but were not in fact county employees technically.
There's a non-county portion on the bottom.
Yeah.
We're not listed. Yes, the one that's a handout today. It says non-county portion on the bottom. It's probably just an oversight, but I just want to make sure the committee's aware of it.
Okay. All right, any other public comments? I think our discussion is mature at this point on this topic. Are we comfortable moving forward?
Wait, I have one question. Do you have time, Gene?
We have all kinds of time.
I'd like to talk to the sheriff. When you said, Sheriff Hansel, that you were going to have 5 or 6 Measure Z positions retired this year, is that what you said?
No, I said we're going to have 5 or 6 positions that did not get filled this year that were allocations through Measure Z. Our rural deputy positions, resident deputy positions, we did not fill those this year. And I don't anticipate filling them before July 1st. And so we will be turning that money back over to the county to allocate for another purpose.
Thank you. But once the supervisors, the committee recommends, you say we need a policeman, a sheriff to close the gate on Mad River. That position is always there. It never goes away. If that gentleman if that sheriff retires, you're going to appoint another sheriff to take his place to close the gate on Mad River.
That's correct. It's a full-time
It's a
equivalent
sunset.
employee. Full-time employee, yes. So it's an allocation in our budget, and so it's left vacant. We will fill that position.
Okay, so anything that we give the fireman, the sheriff, will never go off the books.
Unless the Board of Supervisors deems it
Right.
not necessary and doesn't fund it, then it doesn't go off the books.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other comments? Okay, moving on to D3, discussion of the recommendation process for fiscal year 2021.
Thank you. Yes, this is intended to be a discussion item for your committee to determine if any revisions to the vetting process are required. Over the past 2 years, the committee sorted the applications into yes and no categories. And I have a sample in your packet of what that worksheet looked like that we used. So you sorted them into yes and no categories as to whether they met the ballot language, and then prioritized those with level 1, 2, or 3, with level 1 being the highest priority. You then received fairly extensive public input and held some discussions and developed primary and secondary recommendations for the Board of Supervisors to consider. The primary recommendations contained your highest priority applications, and the secondary recommendations were for consideration should additional funding become available. Your committee recommended any funds that will not or cannot be expended during the fiscal year to be reallocated at that time per your secondary recommendations. In addition to assist with formulating those recommendations, the committee also asked the top applicants to return with a low and mid-range budget in order to recommend as many projects as possible. So now it falls to you to discuss whether you would like to continue this process.
So open question to committee, are you comfortable with the process we have historically used? And if not, what modifications would you be interested in?
I think the process has worked, but I am concerned that when we get into the meat of it, we get to a lot of great recommendations. And I think this committee is torn oftentimes because, again, there's not enough money. And then we ask for the, again, essential services, public safety services, ambulance, roads, to all take a cut. In order for us to kind of piece in more programs. And I don't think we should do that this year. I really don't. My recommendation would be to, again, approve yes or no, then to prioritize, and then put a list of the top priorities down. And if that means that 8 of the projects get funded, and then the 9th gets partially funded, I think that's how we should do it. And then as far as down the list, then we just rank them 10, 11, 12, 13. These are our ranks for the Board of Supervisors to go, in the order that we said should be a priority. And again, they can do whatever they want. They can say, no, we want number 30 to go up to the front if they want. But I just don't want to, again, ask fire to take another cut. I don't want to ask Arcata PD or Eureka Police Department to take another cut, because they're coming in with really good programs and that have positions tied to them. And I believe that's really the intent of a lot of our ballot language, is to fund these public safety programs and ambulances. And so that's, again, would be my recommendation, and I guess we can talk about that.
I want to agree with the sheriff wholeheartedly on that one. I thought last year that we were in a negotiation, in a discussion that was taking a lot of time. We were getting to the end of the day, and Commissioner Cole came up with 20% discount, and we just all said, okay, that sort of solves the problem, let's go home. So I agree that we should go item by item and work it out. I agree with the sheriff.
I want to say that I agree, because with the ambulance, how it affected Kamau ambulance staff and other staff, it's hard with employee retention as it is. And if you're not fully funding positions, people aren't going to move somewhere and take a position staffed at 3/4 time. It's just not. it doesn't work, and we have a hard time retaining employees in the Fifth District because of housing.
I don't mean to say that, I didn't mean to say anything bad against Commissioner Cole. I just said that solved the problem at the time, but it's not the way I want to solve it in the future.
I appreciate that. And in that instance, I was trying to look for the best solution for the greatest good.
Right.
And coming into this, and last year was my first year, there was no framework. There was no guideline for how do we do this other than working through the process. And so taking that context, that's where that conversation came from.
The other problem is if somebody's absent during one of the meetings, like Chief Robertson was absent during one of the meetings, and so his priorities would have been different than somebody else's, and so things got shifted a little bit. And so, and we didn't have enough people gone to use one of the alternates. And so if somebody's missing, then your suggestion is correct, to put numbers on those.
Okay. Other commissioners?
Yeah, I was going to address Ms. Orcutt's comment there, but when you're talking about the essential funding of ambulance services, I fully agree with you, but it's winner take all. You either get some money or nothing, so this is a choice you'll have to recognize.
Other committee comments?
So Sheriff, just to clarify, your concept is we receive applications, we all pick our top 10, and then we make recommendations. Staff would aggregate those to come up with a list to provide to the board. So essentially, we're providing an advice as an advisory committee, and they make the decisions. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
My concern with that, although I like that idea because it removes the tension and torn aspect that we talked about here, is that some of those priorities have a much bigger cost to them. And so it could dramatically skew allocations thereafter. And the answer to how to mitigate that is the applicants would then have to advocate for themselves before the Board of Supervisors. And I guess you could argue that that's the original intent of the process. And we're fulfilling our role here. And I appreciate you mentioning fire because going back to the conversation we had earlier, part of the issue is the allocated salary positions are not on the table, but then fire, for example, is a significant need, but that allocation diminishes over time, and the ambulance service and other things that don't have allocated positions are much more affected because the salaries are going to continue to increase. And that's the tension point that I think the committee tried to address earlier through the supervisors. And what I like about your suggestion is it essentially gives the work back to them, and we've done our due diligence, and the conflict in some ways seems mitigated. But thanks.
Just go ahead.
Sorry. One thing that I would suggest, though, this committee, I mean, we are vetting the applications. And so I think even though some of these applications will meet the ballot language of what Measure Z is about, then we can look at the spirit of it as well, too, and we can judge that because someone may come in with a $1 million worth of a program, and we say, well, we can't fund you and them, but at that point in time, we can talk about that particular application and say, we like this part of the application. We would like to be able to prioritize that. Are you willing to take this other program off of it so we can fund you this part of your application? And that could be a part of the discussion to raise the position to a higher priority, when we take our final vote. And it's just a way of trying, because internally we're going to get those applications. We're going to go through all of them. We're going to tally up in our own spreadsheets how much our priorities are going to cost. We're going to find out that even our own top priorities, it's going to be $5 or $6 million over what the allocation is probably going to be or available. So then how are we going to, do the greatest good with that money. And then to create some kind of higher priority within, and I think that's really what the Board of Supervisors wants us to do, is kind of vet those applications. Let's get really the cream to the top and give them the opportunity to do the greatest good. And then if there's any extra money, we already have the priorities, in place that they can go down to those number 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 applications and fund as many as possible.
Just a question for clarification. I thought I understood very clearly what you initially proposed. I'm confused now because what you're suggesting, let me see if I'm characterizing what you're saying. Initially, you said that we would not, in fact, go through this, hey, fire department, can you give us $200,000 because we think these other three have options and so on. But then in the comments you just finished, you indicated that that process would take place, but instead of taking place at the end of discussion, when we were trying to cram in everything into the 10.5, that it take place at the point in time we're considering each application. So let me pick on the fire, because I'm certainly probably perceived as picking on you earlier. The fire application is usually relatively complex and has multi-elements to it and so on. So do I understand you proposing that rather than waiting till we get to the end and having staff tell us, hey, you're, $1.2 million over, you need to squeeze $1.2 million out of it, and we go through and we pick it out. You're saying when we consider the fire application in the first place, we take a look at it and we say, given our understanding of your application, we think that we would be prone to recommending A, B, C, D, and E, but we see some susceptibilities of E, F, and G, and therefore, could we, at the initial phase of consideration of your application, pare it down to what we saw as those essential or more essential elements and those that were more in line with the text of the measure? Am I understanding you?
Yes, I think that's the job of our committee. That's what I would recommend.
Okay. Any other committee comments?
I probably should have brought this up when we talked about the application, but I do know over the years, because I've been here the longest, Laura and I, we're the historians, there have been agencies that asked for the money, and we didn't get it, but I've been in the business long enough to know people, and they said, well, it was just as well because we got our $45,000 grant from blah, blah, blah. So they had grants in the making, in the oven, waiting for it to come out, but in the meantime, asked for our money in case that didn't work out. Excuse me, I'm wondering if there's something we could put on the application that says, do you currently have applications in for the same money, for asking for this money or for this project with another entity? Because actually, there's 3 agencies that happened with that I knew of. Afterwards, they said, oh, well, it was fine because we got our grant, or we got the money we asked for from somewhere else. So they would have doubled their money, and that's okay, except that if we know ahead of time that they do have some applications in for the same project, that might make us reconsider or think about it. We could ask them about it anyway.
To my memory, there is a question on the application form that talks about their co-funding capability, and there's a question that goes to, if the funding for Measure Z were to not be available or decrease, what is your mechanism, for alternative funding? So those aren't exactly on point for what you're suggesting, but I think we can get some sense of those entities that might have a potential alternative funding, although your question could be sharpened in such a way that it would make it explicit.
If I'm asking for a van to haul people around, and I already have a big grant in, but we haven't heard yet, so I'm going to apply for Measure Z money because I think I can get that just in case the other one doesn't come through. That's very different. That's a specific, and not everybody's going to have that. But there are times, and there's probably a lot more than the 3 that I know of, that, did get money because they had, and because you apply for grants usually in January, January-ish, because that's when people have money to give, and sometimes you don't hear till, because it's a quarterly, you don't hear till May. And so I just think it would be a question that we could ask if it's a specific thing that they're asking for. Not people, not personnel, but if they're asking for a specific thing, do you have other sources that you've applied for this very thing that are outstanding right now? It's just a thought.
Okay. Other committee comments? Members of the public, anybody like to speak to these concepts from the public? Seeing none, my sense is that the sheriff's recommendation kind of is by acclamation acceptable. Is that a correct perception on my part? So maybe just for the sake of the staff, could you maybe kind of concisely suggest your process to them so we have a clear reflection of it in the minutes?
My recommendation would be to receive the applications and determine yes or no that they meet the ballot measure criteria. And after that, then essentially prioritize each of the applications into 1, 2, or 3, just like last year. And then we take the top, whatever that funding number is, we take that and we fund how many projects funds that. And then the priority lies underneath that as far as if there's any leftover money for the Board of Supervisors.
Okay, everybody clearly understand the proposal?
But the last time you said something, Sheriff, you said prioritize it that does for the greater good. I don't think the greater good should be in there because an ambulance in Hupaw is not for the greater good, but it's certainly a necessity in Hupaw. I don't think we should prioritize it by the greater good. The fire and the sheriff are the greater good because you do everything.
Mm-hmm.
But we shouldn't consider this is for the greater good.
And I would agree to that as far as, well, I was for there are things that definitely are needed and fit the ballot measure and the intent of this, of Measure Z funds.
Right.
That have been historically funded. And I think this committee should recognize those as priorities. So
So we're not saying greater good.
I don't think did I say greater? I don't think
In
I
your
said greater
initial
good.
discussion, you
Initial
did.
discussion, I said
Yeah.
greater good, but to just prioritize. And so I think that'll be a part of our discussion as we start prioritizing these applications.
So to be clear, that is why I voted no last year, because of the cuts. And I have to defend our district because we do cover from Siskiyou to Trinity County line. And anybody having a heart attack or a stroke out there, I don't know, maybe just Arcata and your district deserves an ambulance. We're not the greater good, you know. I guess you don't have to worry about it because you don't have to have an emergency out there. But we do help with over the bank rescues and a lot of other things. As he said, there's no sheriffs out there. There's unmet needs that this man right here is a volunteer in our area. He can probably attest to it, Amos, more than, as well as works in emergency services that go look for the hunters. And there's a lot of other things that we do than just provide an ambulance service.
Okay. Is it fair to state then that the committee is in appreciation and approval of the sheriff's recommendation as far as the procedure for the 2021 process?
Absolutely.
Okay. I think based on a consensus, then we would go forward with the process suggested by the sheriff. Do you feel like you need a motion? Okay. Would you make your recommendation in the form of a motion, please?
I would move that we do the proposal that I suggested as outlined to Fiona.
Okay, is there a second?
I second.
Okay, a motion is second. Any discussion? Public comment? Seeing none, all those in favor, excuse me, go ahead.
Walt Wilson, Fortuna. Maybe I missed something, but you're going to prioritize with your 1, 2, 3 categories and then fund, what, you're going to fund all the number ones?
Well, it would be dependent upon the cost of, in other words, let's just pick these numbers. Say we've got $3 million available, and we rank priority-wise. let's say the first 6 comes to 2,000,009, just for the sake of discussion. So the first 6 would be fully funded, and then there obviously would be some sort of discussion about what should happen with that last 100,000, and it might take the form of recommending returning something to one of the top 6. It may take the form of adding a 7th, or it may take the form of suggesting to the Board of Supervisors, we did not fully recommend the allocation of all the money. It's your decision about what to do with the balance.
I still don't understand.
Okay.
So I can probably
Okay.
clarify it for you. So as we take a vote, every one of us, 9 of us, I believe, has a vote. And then a score is given to all the applications. The application that ranks the highest has the lowest score. Okay, and then it goes, down from there. So there is a number, $3 million that we have to allocate. And we go through each application, and every time we said this application can be funded, that number gets less and less and less, right? So if there's 5 applications, and the top 5 of those applications, it sucks up $3 million, then we're done. We're done with our recommendations, and then the rest go into a priority underneath that, and it goes to the Board of Supervisors. These are the 5 applications that we're funding. This is the money left over, or this is what our priority lists are underneath. And then they get the list, and then they can choose, again, what they fund based upon our recommendations. As we know in the past, sometimes they've taken all of our recommendations, sometimes they've added to it, sometimes there's leftover money and they're able to fund additional positions. But at that point in time, they're able to make the decision of what is funded based on our priorities.
How are you determining the top priorities?
We are voting, each member votes when an application comes up if it's a priority 1, 2, or 3. And I think very rarely we all have consensus, of what a priority 1 is, but sometimes we do. So sometimes it is, relatively agreeable. Other times, there might be something that's funded at priority 3, sometimes 1. It all depends on who we represent and our priorities here.
Yeah,
I think that's where I'm confused.
Each member has the option. Let me just assume you're an applicant, okay? We would take your application. Each of the committee members would recommend that it be funded either in the first priority tier, second priority tier, or third priority tier. The staff will poll the committee members and say, Rich voted 1, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2. They would average that number up and say that totals 18. Okay, your score as an applicant is 18. We take the next one, say its score ends up being 20. Yours would be ranked above the one that, numerically has a higher score. And when we complete that process, we will have a list where by consensus, we have identified the highest ranking application, the second highest, and all the way down the list. Then it's a matter of taking a look at the available monies and saying, okay, given the $3 million we have available, we can fund 100% of number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and there is potentially a small amount, either deficit or a small amount left over, and we can say to the Board of Supervisors, that we have in the past, we would recommend allocation on this basis. If you end up with more money because your revenue is actually higher than your projection, then we would recommend you move further down our list. If in fact your capability is such that the revenue comes up short, then you're going to have to do some modifications of the allocations, either internally in the county allocations, based on the situation we were talking about with the sheriff, or you're going to have to notify the applicants that our revenue amounts are less than we, anticipated, and the county's going to take a certain action to alleviate that situation. Is that understandable?
So far, so good. What happens if you have more equal
In other words,
applications?
2 applications end up cooperatively or consecutively being both rated the same?
Well, suppose you have 10 that are rated the same.
Then we have to go to a second round of
Priorities.
prior prioritization. We would say, okay, now we're only going to consider those applications who got 18 points, and we're going to say amongst the group of those, which of those do you want to rank above the others? So there would be a second round of prioritization to take those equal appearing in the first round and differentiate between them in the second round.
Okay. But there's no negotiation.
Well, I don't think that's a fair characterization. As the sheriff has indicated in the past, we have talked to a number of the applicants. Just again, talking about the fire last year gave up a huge amount of money in the last round to try to make the process work for some of the other applicants, okay? Politically and practically, whether that was a good decision is something that everybody will have their personal opinion on. But it was certainly, you know, good-spirited on their part, and they took a look at their own application and said, we feel that we can be flexible to this degree to support the general process. So I think they deserve a lot of credit, and hopefully they got credit for that, because they could have said, no, we're not giving up a nickel. And in that position, 2 or 3 of the other applicants who ended up receiving money probably would not have. So I don't think your characterization that there's no discussion or no negotiation is likely to bear fruit in the reality. The sheriff has suggested that we don't include that as part of our initial process and so on, but I can't imagine, quite frankly, this coming down to the point where there isn't some discussion about, hey, we're a little bit short here, or we're a little bit strong here, what can we do about it? I mean, that's just, I think that's an intelligent position to take. So I think the characterization that there would be no negotiation is not accurate.
Okay, thank you.
I don't see this discussion as much different than what we've been doing for the last 2 or 3 years.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah. And the negotiation of it.
I assume, since the applications have already gone out and the applicants aren't aware of this discussion, actually, let me get the motion voted on first, and then I can talk to the staff about a practical matter. So we have a motion forwarded by the sheriff and seconded by Mr. Cole to adopt a process as described in the minutes. All those in favor?
No, I second it.
Oh, Rich seconded it. My mistake. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the motion carries unanimously. For practical,
No, I believe there was 2 no votes.
Bernie voted no.
Bernie voted.
voted yes.
okay, let me do this again. Okay,
I was a no vote, but I recognize that it is approved.
no, let's make it accurate. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your right hand. Okay, opposed? Abstentions? Okay, I believe it carries with one negative vote. Okay, so we will initiate our discussions based on that discussion at our meeting on, that's March 3rd or whenever it is. Just as far as notification of the applicants and so on, is it too much of an ask to ask you to make the applicants maybe just a little follow-up email or note or something aware of this discussion, that the process has changed slightly and that they should tailor their applications based on that, or is that an unreasonable load on the staff?
Well, this process is actually the same as it was last year. That 20% cut across the board was not part of the
Formal process.
The formal process, and so.
Well, let's just leave it alone then for now, and we can deal with that on a face-to-face and one-to-one with the applicants when they're here. Sure.
I do think we should suggest, because of people, I think, already will do this in this year's application, is increase their request by 20%, knowing that there's going to be a cut. So, you know, we're all business people here, right? We probably know that. Really, true applications, the true need is really, really necessary. Because we will be scrutinizing those applications to really fund the priorities and the end result of that. Because, I mean, that would just be my suggestion.
Okay, any other discussion on this topic? Okay, we'll move on then to D4, which is a discussion and consideration of the creation of a strategic framework. Mr. Cole contacted me and asked me to agendize this topic. We had a very brief discussion, and I indicated to him that I didn't feel comfortable discussing it in detail because I felt the Brown Act and so on required that any discussion take place in front of the committee. So I would just make you aware that he and I had a very brief telephone conversation. Then I had an email contact with him with his request, and I emailed back saying that I didn't feel comfortable discussing it in a committee member to committee member email, but I would certainly agendize it for the discussion today, and that's where we find ourselves. So Mr. Cole, would you like to explain your concept?
I thank you very much, and I wanted to get that to you as the chair first to get your point of view on how to proceed. I wanted to take a look at this fund in a long-term view, so that even as all of us term out, there is a guideline and a framework created for both the Board of Supervisors and for us to look at how to operate with the income. I'd really like to create a recommendation based on percentages of income, so that regardless of increase or decrease of funds, there's an understanding of what's valued and what is allocated to in-staff county positions that are ongoing, and what is allocated for this committee to make recommendations on. I am not necessarily motivated by any specific percentage. I'm interested in having a conversation with this committee so that we can, I hope, present to the Board of Supervisors, say, here's a framework, so that in future years that these committee members can have something that they understand what's coming to them, what's coming to them. And then it takes into account that if there are bad years, the cuts are going to be happening uniformly rather than to one or another. And if there's growth, there's opportunity for everyone to have more positions or have a better effect. I would also like to, in that, create a percentage that is a contingency fund that is available for the Board of Supervisors to use at their discretion, or then plan to be rolled over into the next budget, so that there is almost a seed fund for the next year available, rather than starting at almost zero, which we have this year. As I looked into the history of the measure, every year there had been money left over moving into the next year's fund. And I realized, based on our recommendations last year, that wasn't going to be necessarily the case this year. So I wanted to create that mechanism to provide a framework. And anybody with an idea on that, or a discussion on that, or a reaction to that, I would love to have a discussion.
I think it's a valid point, Nick, but I don't think that that's this committee's job. I really think it's the Board of Supervisors' job to come up with that framework and then let us know, this is the framework that the advisory board needs to work in. These are the expectations that the advisory board, needs to have, and kind of the outline, because we are essentially, yes, we are a committee of community members that are invested in making sure this money is spent appropriately from the county. And we're there to be an accountability, a watchdog over that money to make sure it's spent wisely. But I also think that the Board of Supervisors is the fiduciary responsible body for this money, and they should give us that framework that I think we need to work and let us guide us through this process. And if they want a contingency fund, if they want this money broken up into percentages, or making sure they cap the allocation for the county, then it's got to come from them. And because I think if this committee recommends anything to that board, then I think it would be taken wrong, essentially. But I think they need to have that discussion with them and create that for us.
I think last year we recommended any leftover money go to the county roads, and I think that's what happened, wasn't it? Was there anything
I believe
wrong
that's
with that?
accurate, yes.
What was wrong with that? Why would that not be a good idea?
And just from my sense in looking at the history of the fund, every year had a remainder that was then placed into the fund for the next year for allocations. So that money that was a remainder was then available to be prioritized. And in this environment of shrinking budgets, I was concerned that by creating that mechanism where the extra money went, we were unintentionally reducing the amount available for the next year.
I can't imagine there being any extra money. I mean, there's a crying need out there for roads and a lot of other things that I think we ought to allocate it year by year, myself.
Okay.
Just to help me understand your concept, are you suggesting that this strategic framework would consist of, I'll call it an advisory guideline, and this committee at this point in time would say, we believe that of the available monies, and I'm just I know I seem like I'm picking on the sheriff, and I'm sorry, but he's just the largest recipient, he's just an easy example, okay? The sheriff gets 72%, okay? The fire agencies get 14%, you know, pick the numbers as you please. Is that the kind of thing you're looking at?
No, I think I'm looking much a broader sense.
Okay.
What I'm looking for is, and to just pick numbers out, I'm looking to say, let's recommend 65% of the total fund goes to directly funding county positions. And they can move those funds wherever they need, fill whatever positions need to be filled within any department. And then say, okay, then 32% of the fund then is shifted to, or 33% of the fund is shifted to this committee to make recommendations based on application and citizen feedback. And then creating a small, like 3% fund that's a contingency fund. That allows the Board of Supervisors to say, we have cost overruns within a program here, let's use some of this funding for that. And just to create a framework so that we know that we're going to have a fund that we can deal with and allocate, because I'm really concerned with all of the different agencies that are accessing this process. I'm concerned about its long-term feasibility. And I speak to Humboldt Bay Fire has a need, and we need to fund them through this committee. If that fund is impacted, they're going to be one of the ones that are front of the list that are going to get hurt by this. And so I'm trying to create a framework that's based on income rather than on, no, I'll stop there. I'm trying to create a framework that's just based on income.
Okay. Again, I'm trying to understand the concept. One of the concerns I have with, you know, I share your, I'll call it your cosmic concern about the overall viability of it. But as they say, the devil's always in the details. And I'll do this disclaimer again. I'm not picking on the sheriff, but
You can pick on the sheriff. It's okay.
well, you know, let's be honest about it. I'm perceived as coming from the fire agencies and so on, and some people are going to say, "Oh, he's just a fire guy; he doesn't give a damn about the sheriff," and that's just not true.
Not true.
You know,
I agree.
but so here's my concern or point. Okay, looking at the sheriffs, and this discussion would be applicable to the district attorney, the public defender, or any of the other agencies. I think there is, in fact, a diminishing returns benefit at some point. In other words, the first 10 positions that we provide to him, in fact, are more valuable than the last 10, okay? Because if he's an efficient manager of his organization, he's going to take his highest priority needs and so on. And so the first 10 employees that Measure Z provides to him actually provide more quote-unquote benefit to the public and so on, and make his operation more functional than the last 10, okay? And I think that's true in the fire agency, it's true anywhere. So in your circumstance, if there's some sort of let's call it a framework guideline that says, you know, internal county positions should be 65%, okay? At some point in time, I hope there will be the sophistication in the staff on this committee to take a look, and again, with no malice, simply say, are we getting the full value for our last 5 positions in the district attorney's office? Or would that money, you know, because this is always an alternative cost discussion. It's never a plus and minus equation. It's, I'm going to spend 5 positions here, or I can fund 4 other applications that are completely diverse and completely afield. And the decision process isn't just, should it be 35 or 40? It's, if we gave 35 here and we had the funding for the last 5 positions available for A, B, and C alternatives, would that be a better good to the community? How does your concept approach that issue?
I think my concept approach that is the only way I can digest that is by looking in that conversation we've had about unfilled positions. And this difference between what's the projected budget versus what's the actual budget. And my hope is that if there are unfilled positions or positions that, or money that has not been dispersed, it would return to that contingency fund that is at the discretion of the Board of Supervisors. If that's not used, then it gets moved into the budget for the next year. So then it becomes part of that overall percentage again, and is then available to, some of it is for recommendations of this committee, for the Board of Supervisors to decide, and some of it goes back to the next year's positions. And that's, I'm just trying to simplify it as easy, as much as I can.
I guess, let me speak again from my own perspective. If I was sitting in the sheriff's seat, okay, and I knew that in all reality, because of recruitment and training and FTO time and so on, that no matter what happens this year, I'm gonna have 5 vacant positions, okay? I might know that as an administrator, but given the political realm that this whole thing operates in, it would be very difficult for me to come forward and say to this committee, hey, I know I've historically had 40 positions, but I know in my heart that 5 are going to be unfilled this year. I want to give my 5 positions back, because once he does that, he'll probably never see them again. Okay, so there's a real strong disincentive for the internal cost and so on to reflect the true expenditure, when you know that by having a good heart and doing that on behalf of the community, you're likely foregoing that option in the future, or at the very least, it'll be more difficult to regain them in the future and so on. So I'm confused about how that whole process would work. And again,
I recognize that challenge, and I recognize that, that problem. And I'm coming at this from an economic point of view. I'm very concerned about the overall tax revenue in this area, and I'm concerned that we view it as something that is projected to grow. Based on my business experience, that's not always the case. And I'm concerned what happens to this fund and these positions once that goes the other direction. And I'm trying to build in a mechanism that will plan for that.
other discussion?
Go ahead.
Can you expand more on the income allocation?
As far as,
You said you would allocate percentages by income.
I would, so as the income being the half-cent sales tax, being
So
the
where the
overall Measure
revenue's
Z
actually
funds,
earned from.
and then saying this is the percentage, this is a percentage that we want to allocate to ongoing county positions, allocating allowing that percentage to be for them, saying this percentage is going to the application process and committee recommendation, and then to the Board of Supervisors, in a sense, so that in no year are we trying to allocate more money than has come in.
I disagree with you.
Okay.
And I do agree with you when you said that you're a businessman and you see revenues aren't growing. I agree with that in Humboldt County, but I disagree with your suggestion that you're doing. And I'm asking the chairman to call for a vote to see if anyone would, if there's a motion.
Okay, I'm going to resist that. I'd like to let the discussion, I don't have a full understanding of how this would function, so I'm not in a position at this moment in time personally to say yes or no. I understand the general concept, but I could potentially find myself in support of the general concept, but not be happy with a particular mechanism of implementing it. So I'd like to let the discussion go a little further, Rich.
Why don't you
But you're in
poll vote it,
position
since
to
you're not
call for a
comfortable,
vote.
Does it mean that all of us or one of us are not comfortable? Poll vote and see if it goes to a vote.
Well, Rich has the option of making a motion, and we can see if it gets a second, too.
What would my motion be? I agree with him.
To not support the recommendation of Mr.
I move
Cool.
that we not support
There is no recommendation.
Commissioner Cole's
Discussion
recommendation.
point.
Okay.
I'd like to discuss some more. I feel this question or discussion point is exactly what we discussed in September, and is exactly what we wanted the Board of Supervisors to provide for us. And I agree with the sheriff that us providing an allocation mechanism for the revenue is not our purview. That's the supervisor's purview. But I also agree with you that the concern is that the allocation or the revenue that we can allocate through this committee is diminishing, and regardless of projections and the actual fiscal movement through the fiscal year as to how it actually turns out, the fact is we have to make the recommendations, therefore decisions, and it's very difficult to do that. And I think that's what you're trying to deal with, because looking forward in a strategic way, we have no answer as to how we're going to deal with it when, from all indications, that amount of money is going to be gone. And we can get some projection from staff to say that that's not accurate, but a 5-year projection to show us that information would be helpful, because I feel like you, I don't have a good sense from anything that's telling me that that's not going to be the case. And so having a strategy to deal with that in the future is what I think our onus is as a committee to advise the supervisor on.
I have a comment. So he had already said that he has 5 unfunded positions, so that money is going back. And there's a history of that because we have gotten different grants and brought money back to this committee. I think that this is just my perception, but there's different people in the Board of Supervisors all the time. Those seats are flipped. You can't guarantee that people are gonna use it like you intended, and the people that are currently sitting there now may use it. I could say, oh, I'm just run my budget over here and I'll dip into this little slush fund that the Board of Supervisors set aside and, and fund my department or my little pet projects for what I have going on. I think that this process and the things that are using for and the people that come from the community and different areas have this this open political process for a reason. I am not in support of carving out a slush fund for the Board of Supervisors. That's just my opinion.
Other discussion?
I want to clarify. My goal here was not necessarily to put out a proposal. My goal was to have a discussion. My goal was to have us broach the topic of what the long-term viability of this fund is and to explore ideas to protect it. And so that's, I want to be clear, that's my goal.
Okay. Any other discussion from committee members? Members of the public, would you like to comment on this concept? Seeing none, any last comments or thoughts from the committee members? Okay.
So Amy Nielsen, did you, or Alicia maybe, did you say that we will see a report on like the projections?
Absolutely.
That's gonna come sometime soon.
Well, we're going to deliver that report to the Board of Supervisors.
Oh, right.
So then that information would be available
To the public,
to
probably.
this advisory body.
And do you have any idea when that would be?
April?
Oh, in April?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So we're gonna see the projection and how they came to it, which would help us a lot.
Right, but that's just for this fiscal year, right? That's for the entire,
It's a financial forecast, so it would be for future fiscal years. So
Oh,
you'll
well,
have a more comprehensive understanding of the funding that's available.
and it's a 5 or 10-year projection?
Yes.
Thank you.
Side question as well. What is the expected time frame for the task force that was looked into or directed from the last Board of Supervisors meeting?
Also April, isn't it?
We have to meet before April in order to provide the information to the board in April. So the sheriff and myself and the DA and the chief probation officer will be meeting soon.
Okay, any further discussion? Last chance for public comment. Okay. Just by way of,
No, I have a vote. I made a motion.
okay.
There was no second.
There was no second at that point, but if you'd like to make a motion, Rich, go ahead. You,
Call for a second.
okay. I'll stand corrected. I didn't call for a second. You have the option of making a motion. If you'd like to do so, please proceed. I'm not trying to be obtuse. I'm just trying to accommodate your,
Right, but now that I realize that Mr. Cole was just wanted a discussion and he was not going to make a vote,
okay.
I withdraw my motion.
Okay, thank you. All right, by way of housekeeping and so on, we have a schedule proposed, and I wanted to make sure, first of all, that that was still viable for each of the members. The next meeting would be March 5th, then the 12th, 19th, and 26th, presumably coming to a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors following our meeting on the 26th. Does that schedule still work for everyone? Okay. Just again, by way of housekeeping, I spoke to Laura as the vice chair earlier. I will not be here the 19th of March, so Laura will presumably be chairing a meeting that date unless she has some incidents or circumstance that prohibits that. I don't know if we were both absent, do we in fact have a formal process for designated just a pro tem chairperson, or how is that accomplished?
That, at other committees, it's, if both the president, the chairman and the vice president are not available, you take a vote within the remaining committee who is going to be the chairman that day.
Is staff comfortable with that concept?
We are.
Okay, so it seems unlikely, but Laura has some personal circumstances and I will not be here. So presumably she will chair the meeting on the 19th. If not, you can vote on a pro tem chair for that particular meeting. Okay, so the schedule will stay as stands. Seeing no further business, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved?
Yeah, second.
Okay. I believe the motion to adjourn is not debatable, and therefore the chair can confirm the meeting is adjourned. Thank you for your time. We'll see you again on March 6th.
March 5th, Thursday, March 5th.
My apologies, without my glasses, I misstated the date.